Hi, this is Quarantine Conversations number 7. We're with Mandisa Thomas from Black NonBelievers. Hi, Miss Thomas, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, tell us about your organization.
Yes, so Black Nonbelievers was started in 2011 in the
Yeah,
Atlanta area. And we are an organization that builds community for and increases the representation for Blacks who are atheists, questioning religion in favor of leaving, and who have felt ostracized as a result.
right. Well, tell me about some of the obstacles that you faced to your endeavors to kind of start and grow your organization.
So, yeah, there are plenty of obstacles there.
Right.
But I would say, as an organizer and as someone who had a career, it has a career that was very event based,
Right.
actually putting the events together and helping to promote and advertise them isn't necessarily the problem. The problem is always trying to get the people together and trying to get people to understand the mission of the organization, also what our primary focus is, and we're open to everyone. We're a 501c3 organization that welcomes everyone, but we have a specific focus
Right.
and trying to get people to actually participate beyond the online spectrum. I know right now that's a bit difficult
Yeah.
considering the current circumstances, but we've
And I wanted to
always
ask
been.
you, you work for
Mhm.
the CDC in Atlanta, so that's very cool. I wonder
Mhm.
what you must think about these people that these freedom fighters as they see themselves, saying, it's our freedom not to put on a mask. I mean, would they do that about seatbelts, What somebody from the CDC think about, such a very short-sighted view and
Well, of course, I think it's a very dangerous and very haphazard view to
right.
take. It's also very selfish.
Yeah.
And when we're thinking about the public health, and mind you, I was a contractor at the CDC, so I used to work there, yeah, for them. But
Right.
I did have an insider, I did have an insider glimpse into the issues of public health and safety and also how it impacts the world. And so when you have people who do this and who disregard, and unfortunately, we're seeing this within our own public administration,
Right.
when there is a disregard for other people's health and your own health, as we can see now, is impacting the economy. It's
Yeah.
impacting, the safety of everyone, and so it makes it bad overall. And unfortunately, when it comes to education and people being properly informed, whether that is willfully or not, because it seems like there's a lot of good information out there,
Right.
but there are some people who are choosing to be very ill informed. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, some of those views are shaped by, people's religious upbringing, people's, um, nationalist upbringing, and just this,
Right.
this disregard for information and education. And so,
Hmm.
yes, when I see that, it definitely makes me not want to interact with those people.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Mandisa, Miss Thomas, I noticed that I didn't know this. You had the California Senate pass a free thought day, um, free thought day, and I think it's April or I forget the date, but tell us about that. I didn't know about that. So California has like an official free thought day, free thinker day, something like that.
So, yes, I spoke at the 2015 California Free Thought Day event, and the organizers, which included David Diskin
Okay.
and one of my good cohorts, Mashariki Lawson Cook with the Black Humanists and Nonbelievers of Sacramento. They introduced a bill to the California State Legislature
Right.
to have California Free Thought Day introduced as a recognized holiday, and they
Right.
included, yes, I was one of the names that was included as a speaker along with some others. And so, yeah, that was pretty. I'm not sure if the bill. I think the bill was on the floor. I'm not too sure if it has passed yet. But yes, it was introduced into their legislature, and my name was on that. So that was pretty neat.
Very cool. Is that the only state that has a day or like an official recognition of all the secular
Yes.
Americans? Wow.
Yeah, right. I know that there's national that there's national push for Darwin Day, even though some people within the secular community there's some there's some issues with that. There's some divide
Right.
about Darwin, but there has been a national push for Darwin Day. But yes, California at this time is the only state to have had a free thought day introduced, in the bill.
Wow. Well, one thing that I've kind of discovered in my learning is that in the civil rights movement, there were a lot of secular names involved, a lot of them. There are also several African American figures that were secular that were, very big figures like W.E. Du Bois. And within the civil rights movement, you had A. Philip Randolph, who was a big name. A lot of people they don't know these names. They know MLK, of course, but they don't know those. And even MLK's lawyer, Stanley Livingston, I think it's how you say his name. He was a secular Jewish guy. So I don't know if you're familiar with those names or not, but yeah, that's
MLK's lawyer is one of the first that I've heard of, but having been a
Susan
student of
Jacoby has
law,
that in her book, Free Thinkers, A History of American Secularism. So yeah.
yeah, so it's good now that Chris Cameron has his book now called Black Freethinkers, which is a history of
Oh,
African
cool.
American secularism. And
Awesome.
there has been a push for back in 2012, when African Americans for Humanism was still in existence. Myself and other Black secular leaders participated in a billboard campaign that introduced historic African American secularists with current leaders. And
Right.
so there has been a history in the Black community of people who did not believe in God, or who questioned the validity of God, and also the institution of the church.
Right.
But unfortunately, with the way our public school system is set up, and not just public school system, but the way we view things through a predominantly white lens,
Hmm.
those voices don't get the recognition that they deserve. And so, yes, you had people like W.E.B. Du Bois, you had A. Philip Randolph, you had writers like Zora Neale Hurston, you had historians like Carter G. Woodson, who
Hmm.
is basically the foundation for Black History Month. So there are a number of people
Julian Bond,
who
he was a
Julian
founder of
Bond
the
was
NAACP.
indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was very active with the NAACP. He was an atheist. It wasn't something that, he was vocal about it, but he did not pursue atheist activism. And
Right.
also Butterfly McQueen, who was an
Yeah.
actress in The Gone with
Right.
the Wind. And so
Yeah.
there were a number of folks. And I think that it is a shame that more people don't know about them. But the one good thing is that through the Freedom from Religion Foundation, in addition to the work that we do as Black non-believers, they have their free thoughts of the day, and they have a number of quotes
I've discovered many
from
people through them too.
diverse,
Yeah. Their quotes.
yeah,
Yeah.
there are a number
Wow.
of diverse quotes from different people, Black, white, etc. That people may not have known were non-believers or religion doubters.
Right.
And this is important to the narrative as well as the diversity within our community.
Hmm. What about in music? If you look on my channel, you can see some music I did years ago. But I used to love like conscious hip hop and all the
Mm-hmm.
artists that were conscious. Most Def. Who else? Uh, Talib Kweli.
Yeah, KRS One.
Lupe Fiasco used to be my favorite. All these
Mm-hmm.
people were pretty much Muslims or some kind of religion, and so I always kind of associated, religion with something deeper, like people that had substance, and So what do you think about that? I know there's a few artists, Great and Square,
Mm-hmm.
is one. Do you know of any other artists out there that are, secular, making, deep, conscious music with substance that are secular?
Well, of course, Shelley Siegel. She's one of my favorites.
Shelley, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, of course, we know a Great and Square is one of the most one of the
yeah,
most prolific in our community.
yeah.
There was also an artist, Anthony David, a few years ago. He's still pretty active. He is a non-believer. He's
Okay,
a neo soul artist. If you look
okay,
up there's a song called "God Said" that was produced back in 2011. And also, like you said, with a lot of old school hip hop artists, there were definitely some nuggets of consciousness that came along with questioning Christianity in particular.
right, yeah,
And I think that that's something the Black community has had a history of musicians, creative artists, writers, and comedians who have questioned and also made fun of Christianity in particular.
hmm.
But they have also
Didn't
still
Jay-Z?
subscribed.
He was on Bill Maher. He had a song. I can't remember the name. It was years ago, but kind of doing that.
Well,
Uh,
I think throughout his whole career, he probably has. I mean, I'm not sure if he's actually verbalized his atheism, but you can tell in his
so you
music
think he's an
and the
atheist?
way he's.
Jay-Z?
It's possible. I
Okay,
don't want to put that on him if he hasn't said it,
sure.
but it is quite possible. A lot of his music does kind of indicate that he is not a believer in any form. But there are others, like you said, Most Def, who identifies as Muslim. You also
Mhm.
had Ice Cube
He
and
was in Hitchhiker's
Brand
Guide
New
to the
Beans.
Galaxy too. Most stuff. Uh,
Oh, okay, yeah.
yeah,
So I also think
by the
probably,
atheist. What's the puddle guy? I can't remember his name.
mhm.
You know what I'm talking about. Douglas Murray. There you go.
Oh, yeah.
No,
You
no, not
may.
Douglas Murray. My goodness, I can't remember his name. But he, the answer to the universe is 32.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, the puddle analogy. Yeah,
Okay.
most that was
You
in that
also
movie.
may want to consider the genius or the Jizza from Wu-Tang Clan.
Okay.
He did a show with Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think he did a series with Neil deGrasse Tyson, Dr. Tyson, a few years back. So that's
Yeah, I
also
know Logic.
another.
Logic did some stuff with Neil deGrasse Tyson, but he's very religious. You listen to his music. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So.
surprisingly so, because he seems really a really smart guy, really deep. But
Well, a lot of religious people are, there are a lot
so,
of them who, yes, I know as atheists, we like to think, I know sometimes we think of how, religious people can follow this, but we have to remember that it's institutional. It isn't necessarily that they don't use their brains for anything else, but there's often a fear factor that
mhm,
comes
yeah,
to, or there's some sort of, compartmentalization that
mhm,
comes along with believing, especially with creative artists. So
yeah,
there tends to be, even if there isn't a fundamental belief in Christianity, there's still those very, very loose, spiritual
yeah.
beliefs that people still hold on to,
Well, a
which
lot of
does make
people,
it difficult. Hmm.
yeah, a lot of people are good at compartmentalizing things, and
Yeah.
you know, and a lot of people have just never asked certain questions. They don't know to ask them. I know I didn't. Going back eight
Yeah.
years ago, it's all kinds of questions I never thought about.
Hmm.
I did mention Frederick
Hmm.
Douglass. He was kind of a skeptical. He wasn't a non-believer exactly, but
Right.
he certainly criticized Christianity and
He did criticize definitely pro-slavery Christianity, and
yeah,
in his 1852 oration, he called for, atheists, believers of all kinds who were progressive and who were anti-slavery.
yes,
So yes, while he may not have necessarily identified himself as a non-believer or atheist, he certainly was very anti. He was very anti slavery that encouraged or
hmm,
Christianity. He was
yeah.
very anti Christianity that encouraged slavery. So
And he said
yes,
that
he was very outspoken about
The
that.
kind of slavery supported by Christians was like the harshest, kind of the
Correct.
cruelest kind he
Hmm.
encountered. And he assisted Abraham Lincoln. He was like I don't know, some kind of assistant to him, right? At some point.
Um, he might have been. I'm not too sure because Frederick Douglass died in 1895. Abraham Lincoln died in 1865.
Right.
So It is quite possible, but I would have to
I think so.
double check that.
Yeah, and Lincoln was kind of a skeptic.
Lincoln
Um,
was a skeptic, but Lincoln also did not free the slaves because he
I
thought it was
know.
in their best interest. So we got to
Yeah,
be,
there's a
you know,
lot of
we
complications
got
there.
to
Yeah,
be on.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
and I think that's the important part of history that,
yeah.
that people need to be more honest about. And I think that as skeptics, as non-believers, we're allowed to, revisit those
Yeah.
people that we've been taught to hold so near and dear, and understand that as human beings, that there were certain parts to them that were problematic, and some of them were problematic all outright. But
Yeah,
it's important to be honest about that.
absolutely. And of course, Thomas Jefferson, I can read his letters and I think, man, what an eloquent person. And he did so much for freedom of religion and a secular government. He bashed Christianity in his letters.
He
It's
did, he
funny.
did, but he was
Um,
also, yeah, he was also a
yeah,
slave owner. He
he was one of the
basically
first people that tried to pass legislation against slavery. He thought
mm,
it was an abomination, but I guess in old age, he got like complacent and kind of threw up his hands and said, you know what, to the next generation, and which is sad. But
well, it's
yeah,
very interesting that he was still a slaveholder all his life.
yeah,
It's very interesting to see him pass
bit of a
legislation or
contradiction,
to act
absolutely.
absolutely a
Yeah,
bit. Yeah,
yeah.
it's
Maybe that's an understatement, but
right.
yeah, it, it's just very sharp contrast. Somebody that's so for freedom and against slavery, and one of the first to try to pass laws against it, but yet
Hmm.
some of that might have had to do with his debt situation, but I don't know.
I
Even
mean,
so,
I understand that it was the institution of the time,
yeah.
that
But there were people that spoke out against it even then.
oh,
Thomas
absolutely.
Paine, others, yeah,
Yes, yes. I learned recently that Thomas Paine was very anti-slavery,
yeah,
which was good to know, and that
yeah.
unfortunately the system of enslaving people is nothing new, but it doesn't make it right. And so yes,
Mhm.
throughout history, there have always been people who were anti-slavery, which is
Yeah,
always important for us to know.
yes. So I was in Atlanta a couple years ago for a talk at the Atlanta History Center, Stephen Pinker talk. I wonder how is Atlanta? How is the scene there? I mean, is it super religious? I mean, you live there, so like, what do you experience? Just out of curiosity.
So Atlanta is like the blue dot in a red state.
Okay.
There are a lot of the, huge LGBTQ
Kind of like
contingent
Austin
here.
and Texas. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
even though there's still a lot of religion down here in Atlanta, there is a huge secular community here. I've
okay,
connected with quite a few secular organizations down here.
right.
I also co-host a quarterly radio series on FM radio, in which my co-host and my co-host Sharon, shout out to her, we talk about everything atheism related. So there's a hodgepodge of there,
Mhm.
Atlanta is still multicultural, but there is, especially within the Black community, still a very huge religious presence here.
Right.
And so yeah, there's no getting around that.
Yeah.
But Atlanta itself is
Fairly liberal.
yeah, it is fairly
Okay.
liberal, it's fairly progressive,
It seemed
to
that
be
way.
a southern city.
Yeah, it seemed that way when I was there. I was kind of walking around the streets. Went to the CNN headquarters. Also, it's kind of like that in Nashville, believe it or not. Country music city. That's near where I live, in the area. So yeah, you typically find this dichotomy like in the city, no matter where you are, it's more progressive, more liberal, more modern, cosmopolitan, and in the country, it's more backwoods, redneck, regressive,
Hmm.
religious. So that's interesting. So geography is not so much a factor as city and rural. That's a that's an interesting thing to observe. It's Memorial Day, Mr. Thomas.
Hmm.
Happy Memorial Day. Our
Yeah,
veterans,
it's
they
a
say,
happy for
yeah,
to those who observe. Yes.
yeah. Well, they say
Yeah.
there's no atheists in foxholes, and obviously there are, and there's organizations that prove that.
Hmm.
Um, so what do you say about that? I mean, what do you think about like religious people? They cry at funerals, right? And
Hmm.
they don't want to die, most of them. So it's kind of ironic, if they know there's a heaven waiting. Um, their actions don't seem to match up with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they never do. Then that goes to the hypocrisy that we discussed earlier. There are many religious beliefs and people who hold them, much like human beings in general.
For different
There are
reasons.
some things that we hold near and dear, but like I said, yeah, people want to go to heaven, but they don't want to die.
Yeah.
And I've noticed
Right.
that there are a lot of religious people who are. It's interesting considering that with the pandemic that we're currently in,
Mm.
that for some of them they feel like, well, they're going to put it in God's hands, but for others, they're being just as careful as anyone else. So
Yeah.
that sense, which we hope they will be, but it's also pretty ironic at the same time that
Well, I think spending eternity on bended knee, uh, period, is not particularly meaningful or fulfilling to me,
oh no.
especially to a monster who's responsible for, burning billions of people alive and maybe loved ones. You're gonna be a automaton up there and not, I mean, that you have free will there, you know. But so yeah, a lot of people, they have no compulsion to worship anything, and they don't find meaning in that kind of, you know, system. And, even people in the East, they have completely different myths that are very different. They're like cyclical, and, it's not like a tyrant in the sky and you go and worship them. And they find comfort and solace in that kind of mythology. Um, but man, if you don't mind, we're going to close the logic of prayer. Uh, what do you think about the logic of prayer specifically?
Well, I think
It's
there
not
is
very
no
logical,
logic. Yeah,
but
it's not very
yeah,
logical, but I
yeah.
think, like we said, like you just mentioned before, that there is a comfort in it. But like, like Freedom from Religion Foundation says a lot, nothing fails like prayer.
Yeah.
And even in the Bible, it says faith without works is dead. So, I mean, you can pray and pray all you want, but unless you move your feet, unless you actually take unless you take those actions, then your prayers are not going to do much. I mean, of course, there are situations where we're uncertain, that we don't know what the outcome's going to be. And, we can always hope for the best.
Hmm.
But prayer, as your front line, can be an issue. So,
Yeah.
of course, I don't walk by that. As with the creed of my organization, we walk
Mhm.
by sight, not faith. So prayer is not something that is a go-to for us
My
in a household.
my channel that I've started up is actually called Foresight Paradigm. So
Hmm.
I got a little emblem of a telescope and kind of a picture of atoms and the world and brain activity. Just generally, a paradigm framework that's foresight. Not.
Hmm.
Um, and so I have a book out, Mandisa, Miss Thomas. I don't know if you know. It's called A Justified Faith.
Oh,
And
hmm.
if you don't mind, I'd like to close just reading a portion of it that I wrote about prayer and about the logic of prayer.
Okay.
Um, okay. So, if you believe that everything happens according to your God's perfect will and plan, by prayer, are you not asking your God to alter his perfect will and plan? If God is all knowing, does he not already know what has happened and will happen? So, why are you letting him know? If he is active in the world, is he not the cause of the negative thing that you wish to better in the first place, or at the very least, the one who sat back and allowed it to happen and did nothing? By petitioning a creator of the universe to show preferential treatment towards you, is that not astoundingly arrogant? And does this not reflect that you're praying to an absurd, capricious, and cruel God who ignores the raped and sick children, those randomly killed by a hurricane or disease, which perhaps he sent in the first place, the many children suffering and starving, just needing rain but not getting it in places such as Africa? A God who chooses sides in football games and wars in your rays while choosing to not favor or to punish others, the other team, the other army, the other worker, so that you will benefit? Are you not by asking favor, asking that he or she it harm others? Is it the God paradigm rather like a mayor of a town choosing who will eat, succeed, or even live? Is that a moral, attractive, or in the least bit supportable or justifiable conception of how the universe works? How about children thanking a father for sparing them while their siblings beside them have either been slaughtered or allowed to be slaughtered by this father? Alter it a bit, and the children have been fed and are thanking their father for their food, while their siblings beside them are lying dead of starvation. What of the fact that people are praying simultaneously to many different gods? What if you're praying to the wrong God or in the wrong sect? Will the quantity of prayers increase the likelihood that it's answered? Will prayer never cure amputees? Why are faith healers not employed in hospitals? And why isn't praying banned like steroids in sports? Why do supposed answered prayers occur at the rate of chance, occur only in instances where the cause could be something else and can't be verified? And why, when tested via controlled studies, are prayers shown not to work? Why have supposed miracles seriously waned right alongside the increasing proliferation of cameras? Won't it rain eventually whether or not you pray for it, depending on the forecast, not your prayer? Would you ever rely solely on prayer? Would you want government leaders and doctors to look at this world that we know we have as a dress rehearsal? Has prayer ever been demonstrated to do anything beyond serve as a placebo or show of solidarity? Would answered prayers interfere with supposed free will? Would there be free will in a heaven? Couldn't this world have been made a heaven? Aren't there many instances where tangible action could be taken, but all we hear are thoughts and prayers? Isn't it demonstrably the case that people of faith suffer misfortune as much or more than those who are not? Aren't the countries with the most prayers emanating from them in the worst conditions, those with the least the best? Aren't most of the most successful scientists and scholars and other successful people non-praying non-believers? Aren't prisons full of almost only praying believers? Hasn't science demonstrated that the universe operates by impersonal patterns or laws and is completely indifferent to us, we being infinitely small in it? Hasn't all progress come from actual human action, the acquisition and application of knowledge, not prayer? I'm sorry, that was a little bit lengthy, but yeah, that's kind of my little thing about prayer from my book. Well, Ms. Thomas, thank you so much for joining me today. You run a great organization. You do good work, and the world's better for it. So
Thank you. Thank you
yeah,
very much.
absolutely. Well, thank you again. Happy Memorial Day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.